People of the world, hey, we are back. It's IdeaCast, episode 3. To my left, my good friend, the incredible Jim Rossi, and we're just chatting a little bit about the historic event here today. North Korea, Kim Jong-un meeting with President Trump. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Rossi?
Well, as a historian, man, it kind of blew my mind. You know, these countries technically have been at war since 1950. You know, it was a war that several million people died. And, you know, one of the things I think in negotiation that I've studied is that you don't want to walk away. You should be willing to walk away, but you also need to be willing to stay at the table. And I feel like there's nothing to be lost by sitting down and talking. And I thought for that reason, I thought it was powerful and inspiring, and I think only good things can come out of it, because even if good things don't come out of it, you didn't lose anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, we were talking a bit about Dennis Rodman earlier, who apparently gave Donald Trump a gift. I want to say it was The Art of the Deal for his birthday.
That's right.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating how Dennis Rodman ended up as a liaison almost in government affairs? Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, and this is something like, I'm not a big basketball fan, but I guess I've come around to being a Dennis Rodman fan. And one thing, as you know, I'm not like a huge establishment mainstream media guy. You know, at first I was a little unnerved by, you know, reality TV stars like Trump, Kim Kardashian, Dennis Rodman kind of running foreign policy and public policy. But you know what? So far, so good. You know, I think it's an improvement over Hollywood, DC bureaucrats, and the fake news media. So, you know, peace is at risk of breaking out. If that's the worst that could happen.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of people that are looking at this that are furious and trying to kind of like figure out what exactly this means. And this is a roundabout way of my personal take. So 17 years ago was the last time I did Taekwondo, and for those of you watching, you know that Taekwondo is a Korean-based martial art. I ended up doing a keynote speech back in Minneapolis, and I talked to a good friend of mine. His name's Han-Soo Kim of Korean origin. And so I go through all these forms, and I'm 34 now, so I'm stiff, and it's just hard and terrible. But there's something profoundly spiritual about Taekwondo that a lot of folks don't realize. All of these forms are called Taeguk forms, and they all correspond to an element, and it's just very beautiful. And the 8th degree black belt form, like the pinnacle of these forms, is actually called Hansu, which is the name of my good friend, Han-Soo Kim. And so from the bottom of my heart, and I know my words here might be meaningless, however you feel about you know, Trump and this whole thing, I really hope that we find peace here, and I think we can all get on the same page there. I think that we've all known it's been a massive problem for a long time, and I'm excited. I'm very, very happy about the talks, and I hope it goes well.
Definitely. And I think one lesson from history, too, is whether it's Saddam Hussein, Assad, Kim Jong-un, you know, when you're meeting with somebody, a head of state, it's a gesture of respect toward their nation. It's one of the things when you see somebody shaking hands with somebody who may have, like, put innocent people in the gulag. You know, it's a gesture of respect between the two countries. It's a weird dynamic because you have to, like, look beyond that. But the thing is, too, is knowing a little bit about Korean history, I don't really think that Kim Jong-un is the source of the problem there. I mean, he may very well be a symptom, but these problems were going on there for a long time. And when North Korea, South Korea were partitioned and during the war, both countries were a dictatorship at that time. And South Korea is only in the last 40 years or so that's become a functioning democracy. So, you know, and there was a truce in 1953. So, you know, it was a war that I think upwards of 2 million people died. It was a huge World War II level war.
Yeah, he fought in the Korean War.
Yeah, and so, you know, there's a truce. There was never a formal peace treaty. So technically a state of war has existed all this time. And so, you know, the government, the economy, the people there have been under this chronic stress for decades. Yeah, and South Korea as well, too, because they're under the gun. And so my sense is, you know, you win by engaging with people. And there's a great quote I shared on LinkedIn from Abraham Lincoln. And he said that, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?"
I'm all about that. That's very Aikido, Tai Chi, Wu Wei, which we talked about in the last episode. I'm 100% on board. It's interesting when you're talking about Kim Jong-un, which obviously is the villain in this particular narrative. I mean, that's 99.9% of the time how he's portrayed, and I understand why that is the case. I get it.
Right.
But because I'm thinking about the word villain, I'm also thinking about the main point of today's episode, which is Jaron Lanier. Thank you. Jaron Lanier, which you introduced me to.
Right.
And in a TED Talk that we're going to be dissecting today, he is quoted as saying, "I refuse to vilify individuals." And he's saying it in the context of digital Maoism, which I didn't understand what that meant. That's kind of a mob mentality online, having anonymity online and the subsequent horrors that can produce. And he's mentioning, he says this, "I refuse to vilify individuals," when he talks about the end result of advertising. And mind you, this is how I put food on the table for my family, is through advertising, SEO, social media, pay-per-click, that stuff. He says, "I refuse to vilify individuals in the context of these tech entrepreneurs who are almost given halos, right? They are the titans of industry, and we love them as a people, and Steve Jobs and Gates, and we're so happy." And then on the flip side of that, we have this kind of dark anonymity, brainwashing, and we were looking at the word Skinner box today, which refers to the psychologist B.F. Skinner.
Right.
If I remember that correctly.
It's also, he attributes this directly to like a socialist idea. Like he talks about the tension between when the internet was created in the 80s and 90s, popularized the commercial internet. There was this tension between the socialist idea that everything should be free,
Right.
and this veneration of the entrepreneur. And that he says that to your point, the only way to kind of reconcile that was to have simply an advertising-based model.
That's right. Yep. And so if we want this free internet, we end up with the rise of Google. And Lanier in his speech says, in the beginning, it was kind of cute. Here's your, a local plumber needs an ad. And I find that fascinating because in my life, it's still very much that. And we need to dissect the difference between Google display and search. So Bill Hicks, one of my favorite comedians of all time, rest in peace, had two lines that I love. The first is he says, "We all matter. Life is this is a great quote. I'm going to pull it up. Here we go. He says, "All matter is merely energy condensed into a slow vibration. We are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Death is an illusion, life is a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves." So Bill Hicks is profound. So he said that, and he also said this. He says, "If you're in advertising, kill yourself. There is no joke here. Just end your life. You're a stain on humanity. Just be done with breathing." And as an advertiser full-time, I found myself wrestling with this quote from this comedian hero of mine. And I think what Bill's talking about when he talks about advertisers committing suicide is that in his era, you had tobacco companies, alcohol companies, creating the only advertising that existed at that time, which was TV ads. Or radio ads, and that plays into the Skinner box. And what we mean by Skinner box is, imagine the box where the rat has to pick either a pellet or an electric shock. So living in this space where we're just constantly bombarding folks with this brainwashing messaging, and to Jim's point that he made earlier, might be on, let's say, Fox News. Maybe they're running an ad there, and they're talking about ISIS bombing, and then here's this Colgate ad, and it's all just very gross.
Yeah, let me drill down to that a little bit. So I think he was really harsh about advertising. I do not think advertisers should kill themselves. I think they actually create a lot of value. I think what he was getting at with the internet, the rise of the digital collective, and he had written an article back in 2006 called Digital Maoism, which made him famous, and that's why he's doing a TED Talk now. So he has a history of being very prescient. And so I think there's at least three things connecting in this business model that's dangerous. You've got the rise of social media, which I don't think in itself is a bad thing, not at all, but the rise of social media in this advertising model, clicks, views, the news media, and then you've got these devices you're connected to 24/7. So he talks about advertising going from cute to this behavior modification regime with these mutually reinforcing things. Social media, devices 24/7, news media. Now the thing with the news media, and that's my specialty, that I think is I think they've always had a bad business model relying primarily on ad revenue. And I think that what Jaron Lanier is talking about basically perfected a terrible business model and made it much worse. And the idea is because advertising, you want to maximize clicks, views, revenue. You want to maximize the time that somebody spends watching or reading your stuff. So my specialty, I like to think, is to be able to convey things accurately and fairly in the shortest amount of time possible. That's the last thing the news media wants. That's why they won't hire me, even though I have like 324,000 subscribers, because they don't want that. They want you to keep watching. They want breaking news. They want to keep looping things. They want to keep stringing you along so they can sell ads to you. So the advertiser is the customer in this model. The reader or the viewer is the product. Your data, your time is the product.
Yep. Yeah, I find that fascinating. So in my life, display ads, which, as Jim was just mentioning, fall into that, somewhat corrupt need to constantly be talking about horrible things to get folks to the website, clickbait, gross, all that stuff.
Just explain that a little bit. So are those the ads that come up, like if I go to like Fox News or MSNBC or the New York Times, the ones that come up when the article starts? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so display refers to the Google Display Network, which are, so the publisher download something called AdSense, and they put it in various forms, blocks, rectangles of varying sizes, and it just pulls in whichever ad they think is best. And so it's really up to Google to decide where they want to go with that particular ad. Now, I will say, in my experience, if you're not a Fortune 1000 company, display ads typically are terrible. Now, Facebook has gotten to the point where you can call them display because they're actually in the wall. So is that display to a certain sense? Yes. Is it more George Orwellian 1984 dystopian hellscape where they know exactly where you are and they're serving ads specific to your gender and your profession and your age? Yeah. So I'm actually more concerned about Facebook. But Google Display, I think, for small and mid-sized businesses is largely a loser unless you want to have the conversation about branding. And branding, just to make one quick point on that, is totally changing. As far as I'm concerned, shows, podcasts, getting your face out there, having an opinion, getting people to want you on their shows, public speaking, Facebook Live, that's the new branding. And so it's standing up for something that you believe in that is going to take over this kind of old school brainwashing crap.
That's fascinating. That's a lot of stuff that I don't understand, and it's interesting. So I was telling you, because my book will be coming out in the next few months, I'm suddenly very interested in how advertising works because I want to find my readers. So there's two things related to that at the different extremes where I think it can cause problems. I think there's a lot of value in advertising, especially if you feel like you have a good product or service. Yeah, you'd be excited to find people who can benefit from it. Absolutely. Now,
Yes, sir.
To your point, I see two areas where kind of at the extremes there's problems. One, you mentioned like Facebook lookalike audiences. I've gotten to this a bit, It's this hundreds of step binary process to match you with somebody very similar. It's been terrific for advertisers because you can get, a comment thread where you have your, very similar people that you can market your BMW or your Invisalign braces or your CNN is fake news shirt or whatever. It's great for advertising. It's been kind of a catastrophe for critical thinking because you continue to get segmented with people more and more who think more and more like you. So that's been a problem. Now, at the other level of the display, as like you're saying, I think in the past, if you're like Colgate or Crest toothpaste or BMW or Mutual of Omaha, you felt it was kind of a public service to like sponsor the news, CBS News, PBS, MSNBC. The thing is now, I think the news media has become so frankly disgusting. You talk about what maximizes clicks, views, revenue. It's primarily fear, violence, scandal, hyperbole, character assassination. Occasionally there's something cool, there's a cat playing tennis or something, or world peace breaks out. But generally speaking, most of it is pretty negative. And so the thing is, your ads, whether you're personally buying them or whether Google is selecting them, you go to the front page, there's a shooting and it's on MSNBC or Fox or CNN, and they're looping it 24/7. When you click on it, you know, this footage of innocent people dying or this scandal is brought to you by your product. That's a Skinner, that's operant conditioning, that's a behaviorist, that's an association built in. And I think it's a very negative association. I wouldn't want my product associated with that. And so that to me is a big problem. And I think it's smart for companies to ask themselves at this point whether they want to be associated with something like that. You know, I did see, like on YouTube, you know, people are concerned about where their ads are going. I think that's a good question to have. I would caution people, if it was my product or service, I'm less interested in the political content per se of what people are discussing, and more so that I don't want my product associated with violence, you know, whether it's the killing of innocent people or whether it's really violent movies on TV or Netflix. I don't want my product associated with that.
And I find that fascinating that you say that, because before I even started with any of this, you know, I'm an advertiser nonsense that I've moved into. The Bill Hicks was always resonating in my head, and I started this entire process of getting to where I'm at now in the internet marketing stage through creating lesson plans for ESL in Spanish back when I was a teacher. That's how I got into the SEO game. So I'd write like how to tell time in Spanish lesson plan, and then a teacher in Albuquerque would, you know, frantically search for the lesson plan that they need the night before, find this, it was all queued up for them, and I saw a lot of value in that. It wasn't until later that what I was doing, which was the article creation, content creation, this was like 9-10 years ago, was called SEO, and then subsequently advertising. And so I like to go all the way back when I talk about advertising to the Latin root, which is advertere, which simply meant to turn toward. That's all it is. And we're all turning towards our phone. It's where we are placing our attention nowadays. And the very first thing we do in life as a baby is advertise. We cry. If you've ever heard a baby cry, and I know you have, you know that it's going to get your attention. And so it gets rough when we're crying and associating those sorts of things with ISIS terrorist bombings. That's just bad targeting. That's just bad advertising. And so I would say advertising as it stands today is, one, organic through things like SEO, but you run into problems where, let's say you're a local plumber, electrician, whatever, or you don't have a sexy company, you sell insurance, normal human things you're doing. Good luck on the organic growth side, right? Because you're not lingerie, right? You're not Formula One racing. It's not sexy, it's not interesting. And so that's where we fall into not display, but pay-per-click, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. This is the game now, which is you've got your major players, the folks that receive all the attention, your Facebooks, your Googles, and we have to find a way to buy in and receive the attention we want, while simultaneously growing the organic side, which is Google rankings and stuff like that. The next big thing that a lot of folks are talking about is actually voice. So Alexa talking to the AI and how we're going to rank in that space. You know, like, Alexa, who's the best local plumber? Alexa, who's a great electrician? Like, those sorts of rankings are what's next. But as we get back to Lanier, he had a quote that I thought was beautiful. He says, creativity as an alternative to death. Which I think is just a profound and beautiful statement that can tie in all of the points that we're making today, which is, I don't care if you're a corporation, I don't care if you're Fortune 1000, whatever, it makes no difference to me. What you're gonna find is that this creativity, finding your soul within your business, clearly would not work if you have an ad on, you know, whatever news outlet where there's a bombing, here's your display ad. You're missing the point. So how do we create, how do we do so mindfully and avoid what we talked about earlier, which is that Skinner box and the electric shock?
That's awesome, man. I really like that we're connecting kind of the theory here and the practice. What I'm going to do too is, I'd certainly recommend, and we'll put the links to his short TED Talk and also the longer essay that he wrote in 2006, Digital Maoism. What I'm going to do here is I want to read a couple quotes, one from each, and the idea is to put this a little bit in context because he had his finger on the pulse of what was going on because he's somebody that helped to design the internet. So this is from 2006, and he was warning about the rise of online collectivism. And one of the things he talks about, the rise of anonymity plus algorithms. And he used the example of Wikipedia. Like a lot of times Wikipedia reinforces certain political biases, certain things that may be incorrect. Cheryl Atkinson, who's an investigative journalist I really respect, she recently did a TED Talk where she was talking about the author Philip Roth. His Wikipedia was factually inaccurate about actually like name, date, like factual things about his life.
Right.
And he couldn't get it changed. It's his own website, it's his own page. So this is what a quote from Jaron Lanier, Digital Maoism, 2006. He was warning about the rise of the online collectivism, the digital mob, which I think is what we're seeing over and over on Twitter, Facebook, not too much on LinkedIn, which is why I'm there. Part of the larger pattern of the appeal of a new online collectivism that is nothing less than a resurgence of the idea that the collective is all wise, that it is desirable to have influence concentrated in a bottleneck that can channel the collective with the most verity and force. This is different from representative democracy or meritocracy. This idea has had dreadful consequences when thrust upon us from the extreme right or the extreme left in various historical periods. The fact that it's now being reintroduced today by prominent technologists and futurists, this is in 2006, people who in many cases I know and like, doesn't make it any less dangerous. Again, this is as Facebook and Google are taking off, 12 years ago. What's to stop an online mass of anonymous but connected people from suddenly turning into a mean mob, just like masses of people have time and time again in the history of every human culture? And I think he is explaining what's been going on, in terms of politics, in terms of character assassination. I think that's basically what has happened with essentially what the news media is at this time. And then this second quote is from his TED Talk near the end. He's talking about creativity versus death. It's worth watching because he brings it to this point.
Link in the description.
Right. At the end of the talk, he says, we cannot have a society in which if two people wish to communicate, the only way they can do that is if it's financed by a third party who wishes to manipulate them. That's essentially what he's talking about. When they tried to make the internet free and venerated the entrepreneur, rule of business, there is no such thing as a free lunch. You pay for it with your time, advertising. You pay for it with your data, advertising. And what's happened from just cute ads to behavior manipulation, you've got political manipulation, business manipulation, you've got these things going on. And so Google, Facebook, anybody that's primarily relying on this free model, you're very much at risk for this manipulation. And so what he talks about is that, because we want some insight as to how to prepare business-wise. And he thinks that the future is people maybe start paying for stuff, which I think is like an interesting idea. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not freaking out about the repeal of net neutrality as much as some people.
That is a hot button issue for sure. And if you've ever been on Reddit, you know that folks are very passionate about net neutrality, and that might be a discussion for another day in and of itself. But a couple things you mentioned that I like, dreadful on the right and the left, the mob mentality, that is absolutely true. I think the more we continue to consider ourselves, oh, I'm a liberal, oh, I'm a conservative, I'm a this, I'm a that, so immediately you're boxing yourself in to a certain behavior. And so I believe in balance. I always have. And to get back to what we talked about in
yin and yang.
Thank you very much. How we started today's show, the Taeguk forms, which is the Korean translation of the word Tai Chi, and Tai Chi meaning supreme ultimate is symbolized by the yin yang. And it's an ancient symbol that's resonated with people from time immemorial for a reason. We need the left and the right. We need the left foot to carry the weight and then transfer it to the right foot that then takes a break, give it to the left foot. Balance is incredibly important. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't lean to the left or to the right when you think things are out of balance. What I'm saying is that for the last 8 years, and I don't know of almost anyone else who has done this, my right hand started to hurt when I was using my mouse. It really hurt, and it was affecting productivity. I was feeling sluggish in this thing. unlike most folks, I switched to my other hand. And I don't know why we as a community have such a hard time doing that. So I implore you, be independent in your thought process. Look at the choices you are making on right and left, and see where your sticking points are. If there's something someone can say to you and just touch you on this sensitive spot, maybe you need to stretch your mind in that particular area to be able to receive new information, because the AI, the social media landscape we find ourselves in today is intentionally forcing you into a certain mindset, the one you already have.
Right, and I'll just add one little quick tip, because a lot of times my readers ask me, well, what do you recommend? Well, obviously I'm self-serving, so I recommend people read books because I want to read books. A technique that I use, and I've done this recently with Nassim Taleb and Steven Pinker, is when I get interested in a particular subject, this goes back to when I went to grad school for history, I try to find the top 2 or 3 writers in the subject with different perspectives. Pinker and Taleb, a lot of things that go on in the world, whether it's libertarianism, populism, they agree on the media, but most things, they see things very differently. And so what I've been doing, I've just been alternating reading their stuff. And so what happens is thesis, antithesis, and then my view usually evolves into the synthesis. The best points, I feel like if both of them agree on something, that's strong. And then if they disagree on something, it's incredibly illuminating.
Yeah, that is exactly right. Sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Louis Brandeis.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe in independent thought, if you believe in balance, like and subscribe, share, help us out. We very much appreciate you spending some time with us, and we will see you next time.